We are live, ladies and gentlemen. WeatherBrains episode number 501. Yes, we're rolling along still after the big show, and this is a special. It is a Thursday night special as we are going to exclusively deal with the 10th anniversary of Katrina. This is the pre-show. Thank you for watching. This will not be on the produced audio podcast that most listen to. This is like bonus material because this is where we say outrageous things, we share boring personal stories, and humorous anecdotes. So
we do?
I've never heard any of that. I don't know what he's talking about.
I don't either.
I've never heard anything brilliant or personal or funny or anything.
Yeah, not much funny. I know that. Yeah, we're going to, and again, we're not going to do, we're not going to have the typical recorded stuff, no email. This is just going to be a little different type show as we look back at Katrina tonight.
And isn't it interesting that we have a storm?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not nearly as potent as Katrina, but at least it isn't so far. Although I don't know if you guys are finding it. I'm finding it interesting that it's managing to maintain itself as well as it is, considering how hostile the environment is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got some hurdles to, it's got to come through the shredder here. I mean, it's got to come across the big island, which is, that often is a.
Did you get my email about the European?
Yeah, I showed that on the video this afternoon. But while we're talking here, let me.
I didn't get this email. What email was this?
Oh, I just sent an email about how the Europeans taking it up across Tampa, St. Pete.
Yeah. So here's the new OZ guidance that hot off the presses.
Yeah, it's been shifting everything west in small steps.
Yeah, yesterday
models.
It shifted right, and today it's been shifting left. Because the problem was the initialization because the circulation center was way below where the models had it, so the models had to reinitialize, and this thing's a booger. I mean, it's you ought to see the GFS ensemble here. Hang on, let me.
Have you got the radar scope up with the San Juan, Puerto Rico radar?
No, but we'll do that here in just a minute.
It's got the eye coming up on the southeast corner of the island right now. Wow.
So there you go. How's that for a can of worms? That actually is cleaner than the earlier one. Let's see. That's the 18Z. The 12Z was nuts. I mean, it had members that took it to Galveston. But that makes more sense. I think the idea of a East Coast runner looks pretty good for Florida there, but if you look at I guess it was the 12Z GFS, it brought that thing up into Charleston, and then it looped it back out into the Atlantic, and it's out there being blocked, and it's just doing this loop around things. So,
yeah.
But if anybody knows what it's going to do, it's Ken Graham.
That's right.
I don't know. This one's a tricky one, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think if it can survive the next 24 hours and reorganize, then everybody will feel better about the deal. But it's certainly an interesting issue, and thankfully not for most of us on this show.
Amen.
We'll get Keith on in a minute. Keith should be. Let me kill that screen share. Keith should be. I saw him do a circle deal like 10 minutes ago, so he should be.
He added you to his circles. Yeah, he's standing by. I just did the test with him.
Yeah, I haven't. Well, actually, let me see if I've invited him or not. Maybe I didn't. Got so excited about Ken being on here.
Good to see you again, by the way.
Gosh, and Ken never ages. There's something wrong with him.
You need to share your health secrets there, Keith.
You
look really good, Keith.
I think a part of it was the Weight Watchers and the 100-pound weight loss. Did you know I lost 100 pounds?
I was afraid to ask when I saw your picture, so I called Jim Stefkovich today and said, before I say anything to Ken tonight, did he intend to do that, or hasn't been a health problem or something? And he said, oh no, he's really proud of it. And I was like, yeah, that's cool.
100 pounds.
That does it. I'm losing 100 pounds. Keith, can you hear us?
Hi, James. Yes, I can.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, man.
Oh, he's got a tie.
Boy, I feel like I need to get my tie all buttoned up here.
Yeah. Just got home from work.
Cool.
Been working the storm down there in the Caribbean. So
where's it going?
Well,
I know wherever it wants.
But it looks like I'd say now that the fact that it had to reform its center this morning due to a strong shear, I think it's probably going to end up on the peninsula of Florida because of the South Florida, because of the fact that if it was stronger and it had a better environment right now, it'd have a deeper vortex and therefore a deeper steering layer, and it would feel that trough to the west a little earlier, and it would recurve, I think, on up to the east of Florida, the hurricane. But I think now probably it's going to hit southeast Florida as as probably a tropical storm.
There you go. You heard it first on this show. Here, write it down in the red book, and let's all look at it Monday. If anybody knows, it's Dr. Keith. So that's awesome. Now you have to redo that on the actual show when we start here. We have never had everybody ready 7 minutes before airtime. This is a shocker.
Everybody's ready? Are you kidding?
You're dealing with pros. There's Dr. John Scala.
Yeah, we got Dr. John here.
I'm going to use the restroom. I'll be right back.
Too much information, Bill.
Way TMI. Way TMI. But if we got some time here, hey man, I mean, if we got some time, you got the dime, I got the time. It's WeatherBrains. Yeah, 8:24 on a beautiful Thursday night, 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina.
It is.
Anytime Dr. John comes on the program, I got to go back to the year 1973. Way back when I was in high school, listening to this song by Dr. John.
I've been in the right place.
I remember it well.
In the wrong time. I done said the right
I was
thing.
about 5 years old at that time.
That guy was from New Orleans, I think. Dr. John, the guy that did that song. There's another New Orleans connection. So, all right. So, and really, we can go because they are not going to take this live on the cable tonight. They've got the 2-hour block on Monday. So I say let's do it.
Yeah, sure.
We'll get in and get out. This is great. So I know that we promised everybody on the inner tubes, the interwebs, 9:30 start Eastern, but that's all right. Then we're ready. So here we go. Oh, might help to turn the recorders on.
Oh, please do.
Yeah, The nice thing about this, though, we always have YouTube as a backup. If I do that, we've always got the YouTube. We can pluck the audio off the air. All right, here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. WeatherBrains episode number 501. Hey, it's a special. This is for August 27th, and this is going to be a little different. You're basically getting a twofer here, a 2-for-1 special here this week. We're doing 2 shows. We had anniversary show number 500, the big one, back on our typical airtime Monday. This is a Thursday night special, and tonight will be a little different. We're going to go back and do our Katrina show here. Look at Katrina, and we've got some great guests, and everybody's got stories to share and thoughts on the big storm. So this is going to be a great episode. Thank you for watching and or listening. And again, let me just kind of first off bring in Kevin Selly, because Kevin, like me, does television, but it's great to see you on a Thursday night, sir. You're looking good.
I'm a little worried as we go into our second half century that you've set a precedent. You've started 5 minutes early.
Yeah. You're right. 500 shows. We never started early. I don't think any of them. And here we are starting 5 minutes early. This is a shocker.
This is troubling to me.
But and let me just say this too. I had so many wonderful, kind words from people that have listened, and they listened to 500, and they had some thoughts on their favorite episodes, and it really touched me because we often just have so much fun here. It's just like a little conversation. We don't think about that many people listening, but we know a lot of people do, and thank you for the emails and the tweets and the notes that came in by social media and those that came in by email. Aubrey will go through a bunch of those next week on a regular Monday night show, but that was very touching. So Kevin is in Wichita Falls, Texas at KFDX. You had some storms out there. What, yesterday, last night?
2 days ago, yeah.
2 days ago,
Just
yeah.
a couple. They weren't too bad. We got 0.85 at my house. We had quite an event here today, though. Last night on television, we're getting ready on Saturday is the Hotter Than Hell 100. Which is
Yes, I forgot about
Show titles. Show titles.
this is a very, very old established. It's got to be 30-some years now, I think, that they've been doing this 100-mile bike race and tour around Northwest Texas. And so it's on Saturday. And one of the things that came up on the news yesterday, they were talking about what the riders prepare for and what they do and so on and so forth. And somebody somewhere said, well, one of the things they do to replenish themselves is they drink pickle juice. And I made some flippant comment about pickles being evil, which they are. And so it has sort of snowballed. And so they mentioned it on a couple of other newscasts, and all of a sudden, in between the 5 and the 6 o'clock show today, this very nice man, James Hicks, who has one of these places that does, shave ice and cooler things, shows up with flavored pickles.
Oh no!
He had a whole bucket of them. It's on my Twitter feed. There's lemonade, pink lemonade, grape flavored, orange flavored, and several other different kinds of pickles, and I just about passed out, but I went up on TV on the 6 o'clock show and tried one of them on TV, and I'm still brushing my tongue.
Okay, I will agree with you. Yeah, that is a great show title. Pickles are rotten, and they come from the pit of Hades.
Yes.
There's something, and I will eat cucumbers. They're fine, and people ruin them with this pickle process, and it's
right.
I had a bad experience as a child with pickles, and to this day I'm repulsed. So I go through the drive-thru, you get a hamburger. No pickles, please. If they touch that thing with a pickle and lifted it off, I will know the pickle was on that thing. And I will not touch it with a 10-foot pole. I feel your pain, man.
Oh, there's a thing that goes on here. You go to a place and you get like a club sandwich with some French fries, right, or some potato chips or something, and they repeatedly do this, and you say no pickles, and it comes and the pickles are hidden. They're underneath the French fries. Well, that means the pickle juice has gotten. I wish Nate was here. Nate and James Adelot and I met in Oklahoma City a couple of months ago for lunch, and we went to this place. We were up on the second thing, and I threatened to throw the waiter over the balcony if he brought me pickles, and there were pickles on the thing when it came. It's very troubling.
It is. There's something wrong with the world. I don't know.
Yeah. One person sent me a thing on Facebook. You'd like to? I'll send it to you, James. It's a graphic. It's got a big pickle on it, and it says pickles ... cucumbers soaked in evil. Which is another show title for you.
And thank you for watching Pickle Brains this week. Dr. John Scala, do you like pickles?
I do. I don't share this light.
Exactly.
Cylindrical devices. I don't. I grow pickles I grow cucumbers, and then we could pickle them, sure. In fact, when I was a kid, my grandmother used to pickle watermelon rind.
Oh.
These things are great.
Oh, brother, please.
I thought you were going to say, Kevin, about the shaved ice, that he bought you a pickle juice shaved ice, because I went somewhere recently that they had that.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, I think you would just love that. I'll have to bring you one.
I guess I get it for the racers. There's some level of salt replenishment or something.
Yeah, sure, that's right.
Well, I love that Major League Baseball players used to soak their fingers in pickle juice. Maybe they still do when they have blister problems.
We use pickle juice in the dugout in baseball games for the kids. For the ones that would drink it, we actually did, and it does work. So I can't be around it. It's on the other end of the dugout.
This really has turned into Pickle Brains.
It really has.
Brains, there you go. Pickled the brains.
Hey, Kevin, there was a place in Dallas called the Twisted Root Burger Joint or something down in Deep Ellum or somewhere, and they had the most incredible pickles. Some atomic pickles, I think they were calling in a big barrel.
Incredible pickles, no good. Atomic pickles, I'll agree with that.
There you go.
Brian Peters, do you like pickles?
I love pickles.
Oh, boy.
We're a split panel on pickles.
Brian watches that Andy Griffith episode. Remember the pickle episode?
Yes, I do. That's a good one.
Aunt B made the pickles, and apparently they were not very good, and Andy and Barney complimented her, and she kept making them, and they had to eat them. All right, Bill Murray bringing our guest, but let's get back on the track here.
Yeah, this is a hard left turn.
Yeah.
Turn into
Yeah.
Katrina right here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, tonight's guest weather brain number one is a show alum. He's one of the leading tropical experts in the world. He's an associate professor in the meteorology department at the University of South Alabama, part of the Coastal Weather Research Center. As a meteorologist, he achieved the rank of major in the Air Force, lieutenant colonel in the Air Force Reserve. He was the director of meteorology at the Air Force Academy. Dr. Keith Blackwell, welcome back to Weather Brains.
Thank you very much, Bill. Glad to
Keith,
be
I
here.
remember the night I met you. You stole my position in front of the teletype bank at the National Weather Service on West Oxmoor Road on the night that Hurricane Allen was coming ashore in 1980. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, I remember that very well.
I went in and said, "Who's this homeless guy laying on the floor in front of the teletype asleep?" You know, because that was the only way we could get data back then. I
That
think
was
you were
the
the air
only way.
pollution meteorologist for the county, and I was just a weather nerd and a college student, and that's how I
right.
met you.
That's right. I had interned with the National Weather Service my last year of college there in Birmingham, and then when I got a job in air pollution meteorology at the Jefferson County Health Department in Birmingham, I was out at the Weather Service whenever there was a hurricane, whenever I could, whenever there was a hurricane around, because as a high school student, I used to plot up reconnaissance observations for the guys at the Mobile Weather Service office and dig through the trash can and pull out the teletype data that they throw away. So I always timed my visits out there to correspond with getting there before the janitor came to empty the trash.
Exactly. That was the key. That was the key. Or get there on Sunday afternoon when they were cleaning off the map wall. That was the
That's
fun
right.
thing too.
That's right. Yeah.
Anyway, well, it's good to have you on the show tonight, Keith. Thank you for joining us, and we'll be jumping into some memories of Katrina here in a minute. I'll go ahead and introduce our second guest weather brain. He began his National Weather Service career in Slidell, Louisiana, and after stops in Corpus Christi, Birmingham, Fort Worth, and at HQ in Washington, he's now back as a meteorologist in charge of the Weather Service in Slidell. And Ken Graham, welcome back to Weather Brains.
Hey, Bill, it's good to be here. Just nice seeing everybody again. It's a nice reunion.
It is. It's always good to see you, Ken, and you look great. Ken, share your secret.
You know, I just one day I didn't have the energy and walked into a Weight Watchers office and one of these big meetings, and I was actually the only male in there with 50 women. I was scared to death. I sat in the back wall, about as far back as I could against the wall, scared, petrified of what am I doing here. But turns out in the end it was the greatest thing I've ever done. I sat through it. In a year I lost 100 pounds, so I feel a heck of a lot better, and I got more energy, and all the, going to the doctor and getting all the checkup and the blood work, everything returned to where it should be. I've got more energy than ever. I'm ready to go.
Yeah, I share a similar story. I threw out a first pitch at a Memphis Redbirds game in 2011, and I got back all these beautifully, produced professional pictures that Hilton had taken, probably 250 pictures, and I was a slob. And I literally threw the disc with the pictures in the trash. I have no record on them. I was so unhappy, on 7 or 8 different kinds of medication, and I went to the doctor and said, what do I need to do? He said, lose 20 pounds. Well, I lost 79 pounds. Yeah. And it made all the difference. So I share your story, and I think that's great. So thank you for joining us. Your daughter's open house go well tonight?
Yeah, the open house was fine. I got one in high school, and Brian will be shocked at all this. I got one in high school, and
I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it.
The twins, the twins, Brian, are in junior high school, so it's amazing how fast time goes.
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Brian Peters, do you remember where you and I were exactly 10 years ago tonight?
I do.
I'm
trying to think. Was it a Comfort Inn?
Yeah, and Ken probably, I don't know, he may remember this place or know about it. I don't know if it came back, but there was a Comfort Inn in Biloxi right on the beach.
Right on the beach.
And,
well, no, right on the highway.
Well, across the street from the beach.
Across the street from the beach.
I calculated on Sunday morning that it was 14 feet above sea level, and I panicked. And,
yes, because the water level got to about over 20 feet above sea level.
Yeah, I went back 6 months later, and that thing was back to the cinder blocks. So, that was not a good place for them to pick for us to stay. But
no, as a matter of fact, Bill, I remember that the governor of Alabama became my next best friend when he declared an evacuation, and we got that call to get back to Alabama.
Well, and here's what I wrote that night in the van with Brian. We were on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and here's what I wrote on our blog. I am thoroughly amazed at an interview that I just heard with New Orleans Mayor Ray Nagin on WWL radio. He said that he was considering a mandatory evacuation of the city. Considering, with the National Hurricane Center forecast showing a Category 4 hurricane, perhaps even a Category 5 hurricane moving directly over a city that takes 72 hours to evacuate. He said the city's attorneys were in consultation about the legalities of such an order, and I thought, legalities? Wouldn't that be something you would have already considered in advance, not 48 hours before landfall? What would be the criteria that would make such an action automatic? Mayor Nagin said that the governor had recommended that he talk to Max Mayfield at the National Hurricane Center. Hello? I would have had a hotline installed directly to Max's desk. The mayor said that Max told him that the storm was the one everyone had feared for New Orleans for many, many years. Max said he'd been in the business 31 years and this was the real deal. But still tonight, traffic on evacuation routes in southeast Louisiana is amazingly light. Will tomorrow morning's evacuation order come too late? All I've heard from local emergency managers in southeast Louisiana is the looming disaster that is New Orleans and a powerful hurricane. I've heard emergency managers say that they have thousands of body bags stored for when the hurricane pushes a 25-foot surge into Lake Pontchartrain and over the city's levee system. Hopefully that will not come true tomorrow night. I have another fear, that the people on the Mississippi and Alabama coasts will take Katrina lightly because of all the media coverage New Orleans is getting. A storm surge of 15 to 20 feet or higher will occur in that vulnerable area of the Mississippi coast around Waveland, past Christiana, and Bay St. Louis. Those names sound familiar. They were made famous by Hurricane Camille's 27-foot surge in 1969. And that night, Brian and I surmised how many fatalities we would have, from Hurricane Katrina. I guessed 100. Brian said it would be over 1,000, and he was prophetic. So, and that's why we're here tonight. Yeah, that's one you want to miss right there, but for sure. And I know, Ken, you weren't the MIC in Slidell. You weren't in Slidell then, but I know you can speak to, what you guys are doing in preparation for what could be the next one, and what's happened over time. And Keith, of course, you studied Katrina very closely. So, if you go back to 10 years ago, that Thursday night, the 25th, when the storm was coming across South Florida. What did you think at that time, Keith? What did you think we were dealing with?
Well, one of the big questions while it was actually organizing over the Bahamas, I know I was talking to quite a few of our clients through the Coastal Weather Research Center about the storm. There were several that were extremely concerned. And early on, the models were showing that the storm would move across the central part of Florida and into the northeast Gulf and then into the Panhandle without staying over water that long, therefore not getting very, very strong. But there were a few models, and I remember the GFDL model took the storm, left, and took it southwest and around the southern tip of Florida and into the Gulf. And I was thinking to myself, boy, looking at the upper air environment with this storm out over the Gulf, I mean, if the storm gets into this upper air environment over the Gulf and actually gets over the central Gulf with a lot of water to work with, it's got the absolutely perfect upper level environment with a huge anticyclone sitting over the entire Gulf of Mexico, very light shear, and also something else too that was concerning was the fact that the loop current, the Gulf of Mexico loop current, was trying to shed a warm eddy up to the toward the north central Gulf, and therefore the eddy had not been shed yet, and so the loop current was very extended, if you will. And lo and behold, Katrina did move into the east central Gulf of Mexico and had plenty of room to strengthen and moved right down that length of the loop current. And the rest is history. But yeah, I was very, very worried that the storm would actually get out over the open Gulf and then would be able to go to town.
So James Penn, I know you remember that Friday morning because we were all in a tizzy. I was in Baltimore, and I know we were chatting at that time about what the storm was going to do, and there was a lot of concern at that point. What are your memories of it, James?
Well, anytime you've got a situation like that in the Gulf, and understand for those that are listening maybe for the first time or don't know, my market is Birmingham, Alabama. And this is not a coastal market. Birmingham is about 250 miles or so inland. And yet we can have great impact from a landfalling hurricane on the central Gulf Coast. And at first, didn't they have this thing coming in toward Florida, like the Panhandle?
Yeah, I looked back today. That Thursday evening, the official forecast carried it to about Apalachicola.
That's right.
Yeah, and it actually looked for a while like we might wind up on the dry side of this thing. Anytime a tropical system passes east of where we are, we're on the drier side. It's typically, it could be wet and windy, but the really rough stuff is along and right of the landfall center. And I was thinking for a while maybe we'll get away with this, but you watch the jog, you watch the model tracks, they're jogging left, and there was no real reason for the northward turn. And of course they adjusted the track, and you guys refresh my memory. I think New Orleans, how many hours notice did they have in the Mississippi Gulf Coast? They had 24 hours notice?
Well, the hurricane watch went up on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, and the hurricane warnings went up that afternoon. So, the track was moved, into the New Orleans area. Correct me, Ken, if I'm wrong, or Keith, on Friday evening.
Yeah, if I remember right, five days before it looked like New Orleans was the target, but then the 3 days before, that's when the jog went over to the Florida coast, and then when that little southward movement over Florida came about, and that's when the whole track shifted towards the west, and that's when things got hairy for New Orleans.
So Ken, any comments on that lead up to the rapid intensification process over the Gulf of Mexico?
Yeah, it was this year where you look at the energy for cyclones across the entire Atlantic was just through the roof. So I mean, you hit that warm water, and the upper level pattern was absolutely perfect for that intensification. And you look at a Category 5 storm turning up the water like that and creating the surge that it did. That momentum's incredible, and the amount of water is just staggering. 28-foot storm surge with waves were on top of that. I mean, some of the watermarks that I was able to look at. I got to the office the day after Katrina, and we were there to tarp people's houses and cook, and I have all sorts of stories related to that. But part of what we're talking about here with the statement that you read, Bill, I'm telling you, the physical science and Dr. Blackwell, I mean, just an expert in hurricanes. I'm telling you, it just seems like my job's getting tougher and tougher with each hurricane on the social science part of everything. It's absolutely overwhelming when you have emergency managers, you have the general public comparing the GFS to the euro every single run, and it's happening. It's absolutely happening, and so they've got
those bonehead TV people.
So it's everything from anywhere that they get that information, and it's interesting because what I'm finding, and in Hurricane Isaac, if you ever want to know, I've got a whole list of quotes from Hurricane Isaac from officials. What happens is people are choosing the track based on their Myers-Briggs score. They're choosing the track based on their personality. So the positive people are finding the track that goes somewhere else. The negative people are finding the track that comes here. I watch it all the time. So the social part of what we do is absolutely getting tougher than ever. I'd love to get other people's thoughts on it, John, from your perspective, but it really is getting tougher from my perspective.
There seems to be a lack of awareness of uncertainty with forecasts, too. I think that goes strict. What you're saying, Ken, goes right to I'm going to pick a forecast and I'm going to stay with it, regardless of the fact that there's all of these other options to choose from.
Yeah, don't confuse me with the facts.
Yeah.
I'm going to run out and find out what my Myers-Briggs score is, so I'll know which forecast to pick. Ken, that sounds like that's the key. Pick the one you want.
But if you go back to that, the statement you were saying, even in Katrina, we saw it in Ike too. Remember those stories?
Yeah, exactly. On the Bolivar Peninsula. Yeah.
There's a denial factor that goes on, and being trying to say, well, it can't happen to us. Maybe we'll turn. When it becomes to decision making, the delay is not good. You have to make that call. You have to go with it.
That's fascinating. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just on that.
Go ahead, Kim.
I guess this trickles down then to severe weather coverage as well. Are we supposed to, boiled all the way down, are we supposed to tailor a message for the positive thinking people and the negative thinking people? Is that like possible?
But I think what looking back at even Isaac and just the help that we got from the television stations, the local ones and the national ones were so helpful. It was really getting on there and saying, look, you have a lot of different information out here. I think the key is concentrating on the impacts. I think the key really is keeping them away from each individual track of the hurricane, every different solution, and saying, look, this is what we're going to get. In Isaac's case, you're going to get a 12 to 14 foot storm surge. Lake Pontchartrain will rise by 8.5 feet. That gets people's attention. So it really is trying to concentrate on those impacts. I think that makes a difference, and it may be applicable also to severe weather. And you look at Katrina. Look, I know for a fact, talking to people that said, we're going to be okay in Katrina because I got through Camille.
Yeah,
so,
right.
You know, we spend an amazing amount of time at our office doing training sessions to parish presidents. And by the way, in Louisiana, the parish president makes the call on evacuation. It's not the governor, it's nobody else. That parish president makes the 100% call on that evacuation. So when we have new elections, we have a whole new suite of training that has to take place to make sure those deciding officials have that information. So it's about concentrating on that impact.
So Ken, I suppose there's been a lot of study of what went wrong during Katrina. Talk about for a minute, to what you can, how things will be different if and when I guess it's really when the next big hurricane comes to Southeast Louisiana.
It happened in Hurricane Isaac, and it happened, remember the winter event in Atlanta and Birmingham. Well, we had a winter storm too, and and I saw some of the hurricane activity actually happen with our winter weather event. We have a briefing package that goes out. That briefing package, the president, the governor, Congress, the manager of Popeyes, they're all going to get the same briefing package. So when we go out with that impact, that information, it's all the same. And we have a great relationship with our integrated warning team that we're working with the media folks here. We're really trying to go out with one message. And what happened in the winter storm and others, once the governor's briefed, you shut down the state. And as a member of the federal executive board, we shut down the federal agencies, and it makes it easy for the school boards to say, hey, we're shutting down, we're going to take care of business. I think what you'll see next time is there's an awareness, of course, remembering Katrina, but it's interesting to note, and I get some feedback on this, in my presentations when I talk about Katrina, not one single presentation I've given locally is just Katrina, because it scares me that we make Katrina higher than the storm that never could be beat, because that's what happened in Camille. So all of my training has concentrated on the 100-year anniversary of the 1915 storm, the 50-year anniversary of Betsy, and also the 10-year anniversary of Katrina, because it really does scare me that we make one bigger than all the rest, because those comparisons, to me, are dangerous.
Wow.
So, Ken, and then I'll ask the same question to Keith. Y'all talk about for a second, what is the worst case scenario for New Orleans? This obviously was not that. There's a worst case. What direction, what speed, what are we looking for that really bad hurricane?
Well, Ken might be able to address that better than me, but I think that, well, first of all, I know that New Orleans would have been even more seriously impacted had the storm actually been a little further west, but still passed east of New Orleans, because the parish east of New Orleans, help me out there.
St. Bernard.
St. Bernard Parish, yes. The St. Bernard Parish really was wiped clean pretty much by Katrina. Those kind of conditions, if they had been over the city of New Orleans, I think you'd have gotten an even bigger surge out of Lake Pontchartrain onto the city, because you'd have been closer to the inner eye wall there of the storm, and if not in it. But this was a pretty bad hit. But I think based on what I've heard is that a track maybe in from the the 1947 storm, that was pretty bad for New Orleans, and that one came in, I believe, from the southeast, didn't it?
Yeah, I think it kind of came in from the east-southeast, didn't it, Ken?
East-southeast.
I believe so. Yeah, that's a dangerous direction for New Orleans. Yeah.
Yeah, because to fill up Lake Pontchartrain, that's the key if you really want to get New Orleans. I mean, the Mississippi River, like in Hurricane Betsy, when Betsy went in to the west of the Mississippi River mouth and to the west of New Orleans, it pushed the surge up the Mississippi River. But the real vulnerable place for New Orleans, like we saw with Katrina, is from Lake Pontchartrain. And if you can fill Lake Pontchartrain up first, with the storm approaching from some southerly direction, like Katrina did, fill it up first, and those strong easterly winds blowing across the coastal waters offshore Mississippi, east of New Orleans, that funnel into that concave area of coastline between the Mississippi coast and the southward directed Louisiana coast, you can really pile a lot of water up. And if that's over a long enough period, you can really put a lot of water in Lake Pontchartrain. And then if the winds shift to northerly, you're talking about a lot of water being pushed down on New Orleans.
And another way to look at that, that's absolutely right. And when you fill up that lake, that water gets trapped. And if you have a storm the size of Katrina, or just bringing up Isaac again, because Isaac was just a Category 1, but we had 8.5 foot of water. When you fill up that lake, when the winds subside, the water can't get out as fast. So you pile that water in. There's a small opening that goes back into the Gulf of Mexico called the Wrigley's. So you forcefully blow that water into Lake Pontchartrain, and that puts stress on levees, that puts stress on any of the parishes around Lake Pontchartrain, and that goes all the way to Maurepas, St. John Parish, we got St. Charles Parish, all the parishes around Lake Pontchartrain. And then all of a sudden that water, the winds subside, the water has to drain, they get caught up in the Wrigley's, it backs up. So all of a sudden you have an effect that the water backs up. Places like Slidell, St. Tammany Parish, they'll get that initial surge, but they get multiple surges, some of which could be worse than the first one. It's tricky business to try to explain the subtleties with Lake Pontchartrain.
So Ken, you've got my screen share there. Talk for a moment. This is a Times-Picayune graphic of, what a 500-year storm might do to New Orleans today, given the new protective things that have been put in. Talk about those billions of dollars that have been spent, and what are the most important components of that?
Well, I think one of the, this is protection. We use the word protection. I want to talk about that word in a second, but this is really trying to build something to the 1% risk. So there are storms that will take out the system. So when we locally talk about this system, we always use the same terminology. It's risk reduction system. We actually never use the word protection. The system's built to basically have a city to come back to. It's not built to save lives. This is a system that's supposed to help us save the property, and that's an important distinction when we look at this system. There are situations with very slow Category 2 storms that actually overtop parts of the system. If you really look at the surge, Category 3, you get more of that. So when you look at the worst case scenario for me, because I've been asked that, the 1s and the 2s, of course, size dependent, because it's not always about that category. We've got to be very careful to compare the impacts of surge to the categories. But you're generally speaking, your 1s and 2s, the system can handle. Some 2s get a little iffy. 4s and 5s, everyone's got to get out. The dangerous thing for me, really thinking from the physical science and the social perspective, is that 2, and a decision's made to stay, and you get some unforeseen deepening that now all of a sudden you have a powerful 3 or a 4. Now you got the people in the system. You see what I'm saying? So there's this tricky business right in the middle of the spectrum that we really got to watch out for. So we really concentrate on the impacts during the briefings, and we always say it's a risk reduction system. We don't want people to get a false sense of hope. And what a tricky thing in Isaac that you basically have a situation, you've got the storm surge all around the risk reduction system and a hole in the middle where the city is, and that's something tough to communicate as well.
Ken, what is your guess on the number of people in New Orleans? I really liked your explanation and the risk reduction terminology, but what percentage of people who live in New Orleans think it's a protection system versus what you called it?
I think a lot. When some of the town hall meetings that we've had, I had one last night in Slidell. We had almost 200 residents of Slidell that are outside any sort of levee, so they wanted to talk about that. And they use terminology like, now that they're protected, what about us? You hear that word protection all the time. Talks in the city of New Orleans talk about, well, at least we're protected now since Katrina. And that's something that we need everybody's help to try to communicate. It's risk reduction. And we really, if we have a a Category 3 or higher, and there is a call for an evacuation, it's a situation that it's going to take all of us to hit the airwaves and do what we can to communicate that risk and talk about how there's no safety within. Mandatory evacuation means you got to get out.
So can talk politics for a second. I know that's probably not an easy thing to breach, but Mayor Landrieu seems to have made a difference in the city of New Orleans in a lot of different ways. I know there's a lot of federal dollars that have come in there, but a lot of this stuff has happened because of his leadership. I would argue. Perhaps talk, about what the difference would be like now in communicating, the importance of an evacuation versus what it was 10 years ago to the constituents in New Orleans.
Well, I can say one thing is our office, we consider we call it, decision support. We take it very serious. We lean very forward in that whole decision support arena. I was on the show before talking about the pilot project and Weather Ready Nation.
Swerve. Yeah.
The Swerve, we still have the trailer. It's interesting to look at. Our office in a hurricane, I will deploy 6 meteorologists out of the office. So we will have 2 people that were supporting the governor's office of Homeland Security in Baton Rouge, so taking care of Governor Jindal over there. We also will have 2, the governor of Mississippi will come down to Gulfport, Biloxi, and stage there. We'll have 2 people over there to support those decision makers, and the other 2, they go to New Orleans. So we have 2 meteorologists side by side with Mayor Landrieu to talk through it. It's one thing to get the briefing. It's another thing to have the questions behind the scenes. What about this? What about that? And do some scenarioing. And a lot of times it's like, what's the worst case scenario? So we will scenario some of those worst case scenarios, at least a reasonable worst case scenario. And I think that really helps. And to talk the politics, I've been in meetings with the mayor. How do I put this? Cares so deeply about the city that he's very serious about when the disaster is happening. He's there at the table, and other than that, he's working the community, working the dollars. The city is amazing. It's vibrant. It's cleaner than ever. It's a whole different type of feel to it at times. So he is really working hard. There's new trolleys. We got the streetcars. We got new streetcar lines going in. It's very vibrant. So come on down and enjoy the city, and hopefully everyone will be down for AMS.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We'll be there in January. So we've talked a lot about New Orleans, and I've referred to it in the blog post that we didn't want to forget about the Mississippi coast. Can you talk about your theories on partially why the hurricane was so bad on the Mississippi Gulf Coast?
Well, Katrina, when it made landfall, it actually had 2 eye walls. It had it was going through an eye wall replacement cycle. I know that the official report on Katrina says it did not really. The double eye wall really didn't come to fruition, and it was difficult to pick it up on radar, which is kind of unusual because normally you see them pretty well on radar. But you could really, if you looked at microwave satellite imagery, particularly on the MIMIC system from SIMS, Cooperative Institute for Meteorological Satellite Studies at the University of Wisconsin, where they morph different polar orbiting microwave satellite imagery together. Over time, you can really see that double eye wall well on that imagery. And I didn't know at the time when Katrina was making landfall that it had 2 eye walls. But it was only post-analysis that I went and looked, and I said, when I reviewed the microwave imagery, I said, this really does look like it has 2 eye walls. And then I started looking at the dropsonde data, and sure enough, they were getting phenomenal winds between the surface and 2,000 feet. In the dropsondes, well away from the center. There was a 142-mile-an-hour wind measured by dropsonde right off Beach Boulevard in south of Pascagoula, and which was astounding to me. And also, when the storm center was down over Plaquemines Parish, near the mouth of the Mississippi River, a little north of the mouth of the Mississippi River, but still a couple of hours from landfall on the Mississippi coast, the dropsondes were showing winds up to 143 miles an hour between the surface and 2,000 feet, just south of the Pearl River mouth. And that was in that outer eye wall feature. And I believe that was one of the secret weapons with Katrina. And I also believe that, of course, the eye wall replacement cycle was one of the things that lulled people into staying on the Mississippi coast. I know there was a person here that works in our public affairs department at University of South Alabama, and she lives in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. And she was telling me after the storm, she was telling me what happened to them. And essentially, they stayed waiting to evacuate. They wanted to see, they were going to leave first thing in the morning to drive inland to higher ground, but they wanted to make sure, they heard that Katrina was weakening some, and so they wanted to stay and see what it was, what kind of strength it was. Well, around sunrise that morning of the 29th, before they left. And it turns out that since they had dropped the intensity to around Category 3, they stayed because they said, well, we've been through Camille, just like you were mentioning earlier. Been through Camille, we survived Camille fine, and so we're going to stay for this one now. We're not going to evacuate. Well, they ended up in their attic, with floodwater, and so. And I also had another conversation with one of our clients down in Gulfport. They evacuated to their control center 10 miles inland from the coast. I got a call at 10 a.m. at 8 a.m. in the morning from them when Katrina was still offshore. The center of the storm actually didn't cross the Mississippi coast until just before 10 a.m. And it turns out that they were experiencing, he called me up and saying, what's going on? He says, we've had tremendous winds from the east, and we were expecting the strongest winds from the south with this storm, not from the east. And we parked our cars in a position around the control center that we thought would be sheltered, and instead, the wind's blowing so hard, it's blowing a lot of trees down on cars. It's also blown out a lot of our windows in the cars out in the parking lot. So we're wondering, and we've lost our internet connection here too. We don't know, we can't really tell what's happening with the storm right now. So did the storm accelerate? Are we in the eye wall? And I said, no. I said, unfortunately, you've got the worst part of the storm still about an hour and a half out from you. And so I didn't hear any more from them. But then later that afternoon, I got a call on a satellite phone, and they said, it didn't matter that the windows blew out of our cars earlier, because now, later on when the inner eye wall, when the eye wall actually hit here, they all washed away. And he said, if it's this bad 10 miles inland, he said, we can't even imagine what it's like on the coast. So pretty sobering. And I've heard many people talk about the very strong winds that came early in Katrina on the Mississippi coast, and that's with that outer eye wall. And so what I believe happened with the outer eye wall. In fact, the storm had two eye walls. Of course, it grew immensely in size. And if you go and read the tropical cyclone discussion from the night before, from the 10 p.m. advisory the night before, you'll see that they were identifying the fact that Katrina was going into an eye wall replacement cycle and was developing an outer eye wall. But then nothing else was mentioned the next day about it on any of the discussions or what have you. But yet Katrina kept that double eye wall structure right up to landfall, and it made the storm much, much larger. So it was pushing a lot more ocean, I believe, by the time it got to the northern Gulf Coast than had it been a smaller and more intense storm like Camille, for instance, which actually had a smaller storm surge than Katrina. And maybe that's attributable to the fact that Camille was so much smaller. But with a storm that makes landfall on the northern Gulf Coast with a 920 millibar pressure, that's outrageously low. It's the third lowest central pressure ever for any hurricane making landfall in the United States on record. And I believe that, the pressure, really tells you something, I believe. If you know that the storm, even though it might have 120-mile-an-hour winds, if you know that the pressure is extremely low, this is an extremely powerful storm and going to have a lot of kinetic energy. It just probably means that the storm is much larger than it would be if it was a Category 5 or something with that same pressure. So I believe the double eye wall structure was a really important key, and I know for a fact that I think, well, not for a fact, but I'm pretty sure that the reason that Mobile Bay, almost 100 miles east of where Katrina made landfall, that Mobile Bay got the highest storm surge ever recorded in the history of the city from Katrina. And I believe it was a very significant aspect of that was the fact that we had an eye wall, the outer eye wall, striking almost to the Alabama-Mississippi state line. It was effectively going into Pascagoula, Mississippi. So we had an eye wall nearby, and that helped, I think, drive that big surge into Mobile Bay. And also, one other thing, too, was the fact that Mississippi Sound filled up so much. And if you look at Mobile Bay's orientation, you've got the bay mouth between Fort Morgan and Dauphin Island that extends southward, but that's not that wide of an opening. But you've got a pretty broad opening to the north of Dauphin Island into the Mississippi Sound. And so if Mississippi Sound fills up with a lot of water and the Gulf is rising too, I think you can more effectively fill Mobile Bay up with good storm surge.
So Ken, any comments on what Dr. Blackwell had to say about the storm?
Oh, Dr. Blackwell, that's really fascinating because I've studied the radar many times, and you're right, you can't see any sort of double eye wall, but it makes a lot of sense because to get that much storm surge that far away, it's about the size. I mean, for us, the whole game is the larger the storm and the slower the storm, the more storm surge we can get down here. So I think that's amazing. And one interesting reference, the Slidell office here being on the left edge of that eye wall, never got in the eye. It was in the eye wall the whole time with 100-mile-an-hour wind gusts, and the radar was actually giving error messages because it was rocking just a little bit and was actually coming up with errors. And the radar, fascinating enough, and just being in that eye wall. I think you look at Camille, without a doubt, the comparison was made based on the category. So there's 2 employees at our office that lost their mothers in Katrina. One of them in Chalmette in an assisted living center, and the other person that worked at our office lost her mother in right there in Bay St. Louis. And she, for a fact, was saying, I've been through a Category 5 with Camille. So she was comparing the categories and not understanding that Camille, like Dr. Blackwell was saying, was small. Sure, Category 5, intense winds, but very small storm. That's a big difference in the storm surge. The storm surge is lower, it's more concentrated. Katrina, with the size, especially with talking about, looking at a double eye wall, and you're talking such a large storm. Your storm surge is stretching from the Florida Panhandle all the way to New Orleans. I mean, think about the amount of water that distance is absolutely staggering. So this is, just that, what Dr. Blackwell was saying with the eye wall like that, and the comparisons that we've all talked about. This is even more of a reason that we have to communicate those impacts with every one of these, and the danger that we elevate any one hurricane to idle status. I don't have another word, and you can't compare the storms. They're all so incredibly different, and we get the expertise from our the Hurricane Center. Dr. Blackwell, I read your emails. It's good stuff, and you come up with the science, and then we take all that and, okay, what's the impact on the ground to people, and translating that science to something that's actionable. That's the game. That's the game that we're in.
Yeah, so it's important to not look at these things strictly as a number. You referred to that, Ken, when you talked about Ike, and we've been thinking we're coming up on 10 years without a major hurricane in the United States, but we may have well had one in all, for intents and purposes, with Hurricane Ike.
Yeah, you look at Ike, and you look at the challenges we had with Isaac, and we don't have to get into Sandy here, but listen to the communication challenges with Sandy. We were giving some expertise about storm surge during Hurricane Sandy from our office, and we talked to a gentleman on Long Island, and it was interesting because the person on Long Island was not believing this was going to be bad, but he heard an important news conference that said, look, Sandy's going to be twice as bad as Irene. That's a good message, right? Sandy's going to be twice as bad as Irene. Listen how complicated the messaging of what we do is. The interpretation to that person on Long Island was this: wow, it's going to be twice as bad. That's terrible. I got 6 inches of water in Irene. I better prepare for a foot.
Hey, let me ask this guy something real quick. The levees failed. The first levee breach, as I remember, was about 9 o'clock, right? Here's my theoretical question. If the levees did not fail, the Mississippi would have been the big story, right? Keith, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would, except for St. Bernard Parish and places like that in Louisiana, Plaquemines Parish.
Right.
But yes, I agree.
And so, how much of this is, an engineering failure, and how much is related to that? Because, the people in Mississippi are very angry. I don't know if they still are. You two were down there, but for a long time they were very angry. I mean, livid that the national media ignored them to concentrate on New Orleans. And that's, it's understandable. New Orleans was horrible. It was a big story. You had to cover it. But it's like they just forgot about the people in Mississippi. And goodness, everybody on this panel knows how bad it was. And I think to this day they still feel that way.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and Ken's office covers the Mississippi Gulf Coast, so
yeah, I can tell you, James, they're still angry. I mean, I when going over to the coast and giving talks, they still express a lot of anger. But here's the deal, the Mississippi coast got nailed by the direct impact with Katrina, with the storm surge. That's what happened, and it killed hundreds of people. Outside the risk reduction system, places like, as was already mentioned, Plaquemines Parish, St. Bernard Parish, St. Tammany Parish, where we are, Slidell took a big hit from Hurricane Katrina as well. Those places felt the direct impact of the storm surge from Katrina. That was natural caused. The tragedy that happened in New Orleans was human caused. It was a failure of an engineering structure, and it caused that tragedy, and that's what happened, and that's why and the story quickly turned to that because of the major city, because of the scenes that were going on in the city. So most of the concentration was there, and then it quickly turned to what? It turned to Rita. So we were looking at Rita over in Houston and that evacuation. So there was a big focus, but we can never forget the tragedy that happened in Mississippi. They took the full brunt of that 28-foot storm surge, waves on top of that. That's 35-foot plus of water. They took the brunt of this whole thing. So, James,
one more
right.
question. Ken, what do you think the damage would have been like in New Orleans if the levees didn't fail? No levee failure at all?
I think you would have, anything that wasn't in the risk reduction system, like St. Bernard, I think it would have been a huge tragedy still. I think you would have had some overtopping in some areas, but the city wouldn't have filled up. The city wouldn't have filled up with water. They would have made it through. And it was an engineering situation. So it's interesting to look back and see how that happened.
And there's no way to make a risk reduction strategy for the Mississippi Gulf Coast other than just moving away from the coast, is there, Ken?
And that is the trend. If you've been down here, you see incredible explosive development along I-10. If you see where a lot of the growth is, it is along I-10. They are moving inland, which is interesting. You have some regrowth along the coast. It's a beautiful beach. I love to go there, and there's some regrowth. But a lot of the houses are now they're elevated. They're on stilts. They are building. You see some exceptions, of course, but they are building higher up and moving northward, and that's probably a good thing in the long term.
I want to ask. I have relatives down there on the Mississippi coast, and they say that you get north of I-10 and your insurance rates drop significantly, homeowners insurance and so on and so forth. And so that's probably a big reason why people are moving up to
the
north
strong
of
incentive, that's for sure. So, Dr. Scully, you had a great article in the Capital Weather Gang this week talking about the vulnerability along the coast. So this leads well into that. Talk about that article you wrote this week and share anything else you want to share.
Sure, Bill. Yeah, I spent some time about 6 weeks after Katrina down in New Orleans, Waveland, Bay St. Louis, and I'll show you some pictures from that maybe as we move along with the show. But the article that I wrote that came out yesterday in the Capital Weather Gang was prompted by not only this 10-year anniversary, but also the fact that there has been this population growth along the coast in some of the most vulnerable areas. We've been talking about, it's been 10 years since there was a major hurricane landfall, but as has been pointed out here appropriately, some of these tropical systems that have made landfall have had effects similar to what a Category 3 hurricane might be. But since we haven't had a Category 3 landfall, I've been increasingly concerned about complacency working into this whole equation of preparation, mitigation. disaster preparedness. And that's the purpose of the article, is to raise some flags, saying that not only is the coastline configuration lending itself towards some locations being more vulnerable than others, it's this population increase, and not just the numbers, it's the type of people that are building and living within these areas that are highly vulnerable. They don't have much experience with hurricane evacuation. They may even be senior citizens looking for a time the rest of their days in mild, warm weather, and they don't have to shovel snow anymore. Well, guess what? They're going to have to make some decisions to save life and property, and they don't have a clue about how to do that. And the least of which, perhaps, also is, how do I take all this information that's being generated by a variety of sources, from the federal government to the private sector? How do I know which is the decision I should make? What's the information I should be following? So I was hoping to raise some flags with that article and just raise awareness that you got to start thinking about this. Only takes one hurricane to go back to '92 with Hurricane Andrew, in a year that was dominated by the positive phase of the ENSO. You only need one, and you have a tremendous catastrophic event, and that missed Miami. Can you imagine if Andrew had hit Miami? It missed Miami. So, Bill, that was the purpose of the article. I hope that it's getting some pretty good coverage.
Hey, one addition to that, a lot of the people that I meet in New Orleans, and I think it adds to the article, it's a great article, and the other part is I'm meeting a lot of people from somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's true, because it seems like when I was here in the 90s, it was very local. You're from here, you don't leave. Everybody was from here, you know, and it seems like when I meet people in New Orleans, the response effort after Katrina brought people from all over the world. Some stayed. It's really interesting how many people stayed to live here. They fell in love with the city and stayed. So the Mississippi coast, even here in Slidell, right up the street from me where I live, it's license plates that just moved in from Ohio, and you know, so they're from different places, which is fine. We welcome them. We're very friendly here in Louisiana. Everybody come on in. But the reality is, they do not have the awareness about the impacts of hurricanes yet. So the educational effort that we have, it's massive. It's constant. We focus a lot of time at our office at getting out and giving presentations and talking about the safety things. And the reality is, I don't know how much it sinks in. I don't know how to measure how much it sinks in. And I think people have a false sense of how bad a hurricane could be. And let me tell you, listen to this. Hey, look, if you got somebody that's 9 years old, they weren't born in Katrina. A 12-year-old doesn't even remember Katrina. So we got a whole new generation. The longer we go, you know, without storms, and you know, you get a generation that comes that feel like they're immune. They've heard about this Katrina thing, right? Yeah. Just to add to the article, I didn't know if that's helpful, but I really am seeing that on the ground.
Great point, Ken. And I think also the increase in the population is not occurring at the same time that there's been an increase in the infrastructure. You're not building more roadways or wider roadways. So you're stressing the evacuation routes, which means you must increase the evacuation time to preserve life. And I don't see how that's going to happen.
You ever come on over and drive between Baton Rouge and Slidell during rush hour, and on a Friday afternoon, it's not uncommon to have stop-and-go traffic between those two cities. You know, you're talking a 16-mile thing. Traffic will back up in between Hammond, Slidell, Covington. It backs up. So, you know, there's a lot of people. Look, there's 250,000 people in St. Tammany Parish. People don't realize that. Little Slidell may not have the population, but if you look at the surrounding community, you know, Lunch especially, I mean, traffic's pretty significant. So you're right. It's hard to keep up with those.
We had an author on a few weeks ago, Ken, talking, Roberta Gratz, who talked about, she had a book about, you know, We're Still Here, You Bastards, about New Orleans. And I don't know how that book was received in the city. I'd love to have an opinion on that. But she had some interesting theories that she talked about. And, you know, one of these was really praising what Brad Pitt and others had done in the lower Ninth Ward and places like that. And I look at these maps from the Times-Picayune, and it looks like when the big storm comes, those areas are still going to flood. Even despite these, you know, even despite the measures that have been taken. Comment on some of this, you know, stuff that has happened in the city, you know, sort of sort of these folks coming in from outside and trying to do some external help for these areas?
I guess my comment is, people saw the tragedy and they wanted to come in and help, and it has brought an energy. And, we had an event last week where no PowerPoint was allowed. It was stories only, which I welcomed. It was wonderful. So, I mean, it was all about stories about Katrina and the heroes. I mean, Harry Connick Jr. was there. The mayor was there. It had all these wonderful people talking about it. It was all stories, and they share their love with the New Orleans too. So I would never in a million years criticize anybody that came from anywhere to help this city. And there's an energy here. You go to a Saints game and you feel the energy. There's a pride for this city. And I think that pride grew with all the people that came down to help. A lot of them stayed from all sorts of countries. So I think all that was extremely positive. I think you're seeing that growth and you feel that. And that's, once again, if it's something we want to preserve for the long time, it's about that, it's still about the risk reduction system being to protect it so we can have a city to come back to. But I can't even stress enough, how much the threat is still there, right? Look, we still have subsidence. We can get into a whole discussion about the science of subsidence and sea level rise. Look, long term, it's going to be a rough road, right, for my kids and their kids down the road if we continue on this path. So it's about the resiliency and coming up with ways to. And there's lots of theories about how to become resilient, how to stay resilient for the long term. That's going to be the challenge, because if you have a half inch of sea level rise, I mean, the PhDs on the call might have to help me with this, but a half a rise in sea level, what does that do to storm surge? It's not going to be a half an inch. It's probably going to be more.
Yeah, it's a huge volume of water.
Yeah.
Well, Brian Peters, anything you want to add to this discussion tonight?
Well, one question I have for either Ken or Dr. Blackwell is, has there been any changes in the building codes
Good question.
For future storms to make the construction better?
Well, yes. There's. I know I met with the Mobile County Engineer's Office a year or so ago, and also did a study with them a number of years ago after Hurricane Ivan in 2004, and also after Katrina. And one of the questions they had was, why do we have to build a 150-mile-an-hour storm on the Mobile County coastline when Baldwin County, which is just across the bay, Mobile Bay from Mobile County, only has to build the 140-mile-an-hour wind? Don't tell me that Gulf Shores has less probability of 150-mile-an-hour winds than does Dauphin Island. And so I went in and did some modeling work with the best track data going back, FERDAT data going back to 1851, and I just, was very, very general with what I did, some parametric modeling. Just put in, because we didn't know a lot of specifics on the storms way back, just said, okay, let's assume that the storm, I ran 3 different model runs for each storm, assuming that one was going to be a large storm, the other was a medium storm, the other was a small storm. Take your pick as to which it really was. But it actually ended up showing that hurricanes love to put their eye walls across Dauphin Island. And therefore, if you go back and use that 160, 170-year database, you will see that Dauphin Island does have a significantly higher risk than Gulf Shores for eye wall impacts of intense hurricanes. And, but what's a 150, 170-year period in the scheme of things? It's not very long. And so what is the actual risk? Probably not very much difference between Baldwin County and Mobile County, one side, east or west of Mobile Bay. But yes, there have been increases in building standards down here. And as a matter of fact, was with the Mobile County Engineer's Office again about a year ago, and they were talking about how FEMA is changing the storm surge elevations, expected storm surge elevations in general areas where they're looking for higher elevations now on the coastline around the Mobile County area, and actually dropping some of the storm surge values in the upper part of the bay, for instance, that had been higher, and how this was going to affect future building as well as current structures that maybe get damaged in a storm and have to rebuild significantly. So I don't know when the actual wind standards, what I think it's from the American Society of Wind Engineering or something like that, those building standards for wind. I'm not sure when those were published, but I know that and it may not have been because of a response to Katrina, but it certainly has raised awareness. A lot of when Katrina came and struck Dauphin Island with its strong winds gusted over 100 miles an hour on Dauphin Island south of Mobile, it did urban renewal on the west end of Dauphin Island, just a little sand strip that had many, many houses on it, cleaned off most of them. And now I teach a course on hurricanes down at Dauphin Island Sea Lab during the summers, and we take a boat trip down the west end of Dauphin Island every year to see which houses now are falling in the water. And a lot of these houses are houses that have been built since Katrina, but the island's moving, and some of them are in very big trouble falling in the water. And the next big storm in this area is going to again clean that side of that part of the island off, even though they are built to withstand much higher winds than the older structures. It's just because the real danger there is the storm surge.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you guys this. With tornadoes, we typically have about a period of 3 years of enhanced awareness after a major tornado. After 3 years, people forget about it and it's over. How does it work with hurricanes? It's been so long now since we've had a big hurricane on the central Gulf Coast, Mobile, New Orleans. Is there still a heightened awareness, you think? What happens now if a major hurricane approaches? Will people listen? Do they remember Katrina, or is that way too far in the past?
Well, I know that after Katrina, when you had the hurricane seasons of 2004 and 2005, we had Ivan in 2005, we had Katrina, we had Ivan in 2004, we had Katrina in 2005, and all the other destruction that occurred, various places around the Gulf and the Atlantic coast those 2 years. People in 2006 were just shaking in their boots. I know that on the Alabama coast here, people were saying, we cannot take another hurricane strike, or it's just going to ruin the economy down here for a long period of time. And people were shaking in their boots that 2006 was going to have another storm. And of course, nothing happened. Nothing happened in 2007. 2008, you had Gustav come in down around Louisiana, southeast Louisiana, and then Ike over near Houston, but nothing in the Mobile area. And so things have settled down, and now I believe there is significant apathy in the area because it has been 10 years since we've been hit by anything significant.
Yeah, I'm telling you, for old people, 10 years maybe not. It's not a lot of time. It's a lot of time for most people. Ken, what do you say about that?
James, it's a mixed bag. There were people calling our office ready to pack their bags for Hurricane Danny this year.
Really?
It's a mixed bag. There's some people that I feel are extremely jumpy, and then we get help. We get help from the media stations about being able to say, look, let's remind everybody that Danny's 3,300 miles away. So we really try to calm some of those fears. And so 3,300 miles away, you don't need to pack your trunk yet. We got some time. but there's another segment of the population that they say things like we've never been hit before, or they say Katrina. I've heard some people said Isaac produced more water for us than Katrina, and there's such a lack of understanding that little 30-mile differences in the storm track have a logarithmic difference in the impact on the ground, whether it's the winds or the storm surge. And I have a presentation that I give in our training that moves hurricanes left and right, makes them bigger, smaller, faster, slower, and people get to see the difference in the storm surge, and they're shocked. They have no idea. So the person that says, let's just say in Houma, Louisiana, that says, Katrina was no big deal, these were no big deal, they didn't get hit.
Yeah, right.
So when we'd say that it's been 10 years, That's for people that went through Katrina. There are people very close to the Katrina track that could be going back 20. They could be going to Hurricane Juan in 1985. There are people that have more memory of Juan than they do even a Katrina. So for them, it's been longer. So there's this whole term of how long it's been. It's relative to where you're standing. It's a complicated matter, and I can tell you there's quotes from Laplace, Louisiana, that got hit in Isaac. They didn't understand why they flooded, and they have a house on a 4-foot slab 5 miles from Lake Pontchartrain. So there's and by the way, they said it's never flooded before because those houses were built after 1985 and Hurricane Juan, where that whole area flooded. So it's a complicated thing to say. So the longer you go, yes, the apathy absolutely builds. And here's the other part too. When they do evacuate, they evacuate, they do what they're supposed to, and they come back and there's no damage. In their mind, they evacuated for nothing.
That's right.
So you do that to them 2 or 3 times, they're not going the 4th time, and that could be the big one. So from the social science perspective, again, very, very tricky business. So the education of those small movements is important to get into the community, like we did at the town hall last night in Slidell.
Ken, I'm sorry, I've been off doing a newscast, and so if you guys covered this, just stop me. But talking about the evacuation response and going through that process, I was in Dallas at the time, and of course a couple of days later these buses started rolling in, and my television station was literally right next to the convention center where those folks came in. And that first night I actually finished up my shift and stayed the night to go over there and help with the response and whatnot. And it was stunning to me. I don't want this to sound negative, but the cattle drive mentality. The number of people was so large that you just can't have a real, certainly not a nurturing response to this thing. You've just got to put people on those buses and get them somewhere where they can at least be sheltered. But it really struck me thinking on that how I think a lot of times people think, okay, well, something happens or something's about to happen and the government is going to take care of me or some organization is going to take care of me. And in many cases, that just can't happen in an episode that has such a great volume of people like that. And I know that went on in all city. I mean, it went on in Birmingham as well. But it was just striking to me, and I guess my message is for us to extend the message to people that, look, don't sit back and count on somebody to come and take care of you, because it may just not be possible.
Yeah, when you have that kind of movement, it makes it really difficult. And look, New Orleans is a unique city in the South, in the fact that it's actually more like a city that you find in the Northeast. You don't need a car to live in New Orleans. You really don't have to own an automobile. From the streetcars to cabs, you walk. It's a walking city. And you find that more in the Northeast. So there's people that have to leave that don't have a car because they don't need one. There's a socio-economic factor with the city of New Orleans that people are unable or they can't afford to leave. And there's more to it than this. We can have more of a conversation, because I meet these people all the time. They say, I will never evacuate from a hurricane because I don't know what to do with my dog. Or I will never leave for a hurricane because someone's going to break into my house and steal everything that I own. And they sit on the porch with a shotgun the entire time, during the hurricane. This is real life. I mean, this is the stuff that goes on. So part of the education factor and the city, I got to give it to the city and the Governor's Office of Homeland Security in Baton Rouge and MEMA and Jackson. Everyone's doing such a great job to say, look, we have shelters for you. If you have special needs, register here. If you have a dog, we have shelters where you could bring your dog. And by the way, there's going to be curfews, and we're going to try to protect your house on the other end. So there's been a lot of communication since Katrina in the preparedness effort and the education to really try to address the reasons why somebody wouldn't leave.
Did you guys, have you talked at all about the media response? Because I remember being so frustrated at the national media response and the global warming response. Oh, this was a giant hurricane and did this, that, and the other thing. But the real, thank you, the real tragedy and the real problem, yes, was caused because of the hurricane, but it really was a levee failure, right?
Yeah, we did talk about that. It was just really trying to put some effort to talk about the people in Mississippi that were impacted by the direct impact of the Hurricane Katrina with the storm surge, and the city of New Orleans really, being inside the protection, the risk reduction system, looking at a human caused event. I mean, outside of that, St. Bernard Parish, Plaquemines Parish, I mean, look, they don't have that risk reduction system or protection and levees. Those areas flooded. So yeah, the focus was on New Orleans. It was, look, I mean, that's what we gravitated to in the media then, and would being in the media business, I guess James and others, would that happen again? I would venture to say the same thing would happen again today.
Yeah, right. I've been thinking about what we're doing as a society, but also as a federal government to dissuade growth and development after a Katrina or after an Ike or after a Sandy. Are we doing anything, from a national flood insurance program to even the homeowners policies that we can purchase? Are we doing anything, or even enough, to dissuade growth along the coast?
I hear crickets.
I always figured, John, that's why they call them barrier islands, is the areas to everybody else, so you shouldn't go out there and build on them. But you do.
I think the answer is people are going to build no matter what. It doesn't matter what we say or the risks. People are just going to build out there. I don't think there's anything we can do about it.
We certainly don't seem to be able to insure against it, because people will go ahead, and if they own the land and they're rich enough, they're not going to worry about insurance. They'll just put a home on.
Yeah, I mean, to me, if you buy property in these areas, you just have to understand you could lose it all, and at some point the insurance companies might not want to insure this, or maybe you can't afford it or whatever. It's like, playing the stock market. Sometimes you have these accounts where you're trading all this money. You just have to be willing to lose it all. But the problem is, you got if you're going to stay there, you're going to be willing to lose your life. Because a lot of these people think they're above the law, they're above nature, they're above everything else, and they're not. And they'll learn real quick. Hey, this stuff gets real. It gets real fast. Everybody on this panel here has been on the Gulf Coast of one of these things. You know what it's like.
Yeah, Brian and I had an interesting story, because on that Monday night after Katrina had gone inland and we had been on and up for 40 hours, one of the restaurateurs invited all the the public safety folks and the media over to have hamburgers, because of course his refrigerators were gonna go hot and the meat was gonna go bad, so they cooked for all of us. And I think, Brian, that's still the best hamburger I ever had in my entire life, after 2 days of potted meat and Vienna sausages.
Was Katrina the storm where you guys took a bath in a swimming pool at some Roach Motel down there?
I think it was actually Hurricane Dennis, but otherwise
That was Dennis.
it was the same season at least. But we were sitting there eating our hamburgers, and these two kids come wading across from Gulf Shores, because of course the water, came all the way up to Waterville, which was appropriately named that day. But anyway, these two kids come out, and the police chief of Gulf Shores, who's there eating a hamburger with us, goes and arrests these kids. And we talked him out of arresting them, because of course they had violated the evacuation, and et cetera, et cetera. And we talked him out of being mean to the kids and gave them a hamburger. But there were two kids who rode out the storm, in a condo on the beach, and they got cut off there.
We had two of our guys in Ivan that had to do that. But let me ask one more question, and I'll be through asking questions. Coverage, media of tropical systems, hurricanes. Hurricane Camille had a big impact on me. I was 13 years old in 1969, and I listened to a guy named Nash Roberts on WWL, and I know that some of you know who that is. He was the legend. Clear Channel, the big 890. You could hear that thing from Denver to New York City. And that was my way of getting information as a child. I stayed up all night with that transistor radio under my pillow. It was unbelievably fascinating. And that was it. You jump ahead to where we are today. And I guess my question is this. Now, it seems like in some of these coastal communities, you've got more of these jabronis from the TV stations, these blow-dried boobs, just waiting to get their hair blown around and to make a big deal out of themselves. It is just wall-to-wall humanity. There's more reporters than people in some of these places. let me ask Keith and Ken, because they're not in the media, and I don't like to. I don't like to be considered a media guy, but I'm in the media. What can be done to make communicating risk more effective? Is this part of it where everybody stands out there on the beach and their hair is blowing around? One of these days, somebody's going to get a piece of sheet metal, and it's going to come along and cut their head off, and this stuff's going to stop. But to me, it's just gotten, I don't even pay attention to these guys anymore.
Well, I know that, just from, you and I apparently the same age, because I was 13 years old when Hurricane Camille made landfall as well, and that's the storm that got me interested in meteorology. But I went down to the Mississippi Gulf Coast. I was in Mobile growing up, and I went down to the Mississippi Gulf Coast a few weeks later to see through there to see a Saints game, and driving down the road with my uncle on Highway 90, which was then a dirt road because the hurricane had just destroyed the highway. It really, was an impact for me. I mean, a significant impact seeing all the destruction. Never thought I'd see it worse, but I did with Katrina. But I don't know. It's a good point. I don't know what the issue is. I know that back in the day, when you couldn't see a hurricane on TV, okay, when before satellite imagery was really commonly available and so on and so forth for the media to project, you'd hear about the storm, and I remember this with Camille too. You'd hear about the storm, but you really didn't get a feel for what it was. But boy, when satellite pictures of the storm and so on and so forth were slapped up there, with future storms after Camille, I mean, it really resonated. It really said, hey, there is a big storm out there, and you could see it. And maybe with the reporters on the coast, I don't know, I'm just speculating, but maybe the reporters on the coast, they're getting blown around with the storm, what have you, but it's showing that there is something there. Kind of a little too late to evacuate in most cases, but there's something there that's very significant that maybe other people in the area aren't experiencing, and so it just, maybe it does raise awareness of how severe a particular storm actually is. I don't know.
How can we be better, Ken? What do you say?
We're gonna, in our integrated warning team down here with the media markets, we're talking about this, and we're going to try something different this year. We struggled in Isaac to convey the impacts. Everybody just focused. It's never flooded here before. We had general public calling in saying, looks like the GFS is taking this to Florida. Looks like we're going to be okay. And the next call, I had a neighbor call me on my cell phone 5 minutes before a briefing to the governor and said, hey, Ken, I saw the new Euro model. We're in trouble now, huh? So, I mean, look, we live in a different world that, look, everything that we have, people have too. They have apps. They're looking at things. So the whole game now, it really is communicating that risk. So what we're going to do, we're going to try it. We're going to try to do Skype. The local meteorologists, the reporters, everybody's on air wall to wall. We're going to try to do some Skype interviews and try to show this group at the Weather Service. We're over here. This is the impact. This is what we're worried about. We can toss it back and forth. We're just going to try new things to do it differently. And people see somebody on the beach and there goes that person again, and they use names. They use names of who the people are that are on the beach that are famous for doing that, and it was just fine. But we're going to try to really talk about the impacts and what does 8 foot of water mean. You got to explain that 8 foot. Yeah. People don't interpret what that is, and so maybe we should use terms like that's the first floor of your building. The water is going to get to the second floor of buildings. Maybe that conveys the message more than 8 foot. So we're going to try techniques like that, with some social scientists, and definitely open up to ideas that you all have, and we can work with also the national media to do the same thing. Let me tell you, we went live several different times on Skype with the Weather Channel during Isaac, and I can tell you for a fact that people told me that helped. Because we got on air and said, look, take this seriously. And I pointed, I think it was one of these computers, I got to the camera and said, this is more than a Category 1. I mean, I was so worried about how people were perceiving the storm. I said it's about a large storm, it's slow, we're going to get rainfall measured in feet. and that means the rivers are going to be overflowing, and the rivers can't drain because the storm surge has pushed the water in. The water's going to back up. We went through all those different parameters. Guess what? People got it. So we got to find a communication strategy of how to communicate those in ways that we haven't before. Maybe the word warning doesn't even mean anything to anybody anymore. How about that? Let's throw that one out. So I think if we concentrate on those impacts and make it, the water will be over the hood of your car. The water will be over your car. Maybe we got to explain it in those type of sense, and that's what they kind of understand. So we're going to need help with future storms. With my app telling me that the GFS has taken the storm to Florida, I'm okay. We're going to have to use new techniques to convince people to really take it serious.
Hey, John, what you got?
Maybe a reality check is one way to go. I'm going to show you some pictures here if you can see these. I'm screen sharing from my time down after Katrina, 6 weeks after Katrina. This is Bay St. Louis. And you're looking at what was left of the storm surge after it went through here, and you can see the height of the water because the trees are protected. And then above that, you see that they've been branches have been sheared off. You can see the movement, the way these trees are knocked over. Those are 1.5 to 2 foot diameter trees that are bent over at a 45-degree angle from the storm surge. This is right through Bay St. Louis. You look out over Bay St. Louis itself, the body of water, that's what's left
The bridge.
of the I-10 bridge.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, the Highway 90 bridge going
Right.
across Bay St. Louis. And you can look at what the storm surge did. So maybe this is how you get the point across. You say, this is reality, folks. Let's not talk abstract. This is what a storm
That looks like the Dauphin Island Bridge from Frederick, doesn't it?
It does. It certainly does. Amazing how that concrete floats, isn't it?
Hey, John, I think you got a really interesting thought there. We definitely got to talk some more about that. Maybe just throwing things out there. Maybe the warning is accompanied by appropriate pictures for that impact. Maybe we, a picture is worth 1,000 words. The word warning is a word. So maybe we talk about pictures as we try to advance the warning process into the future. I think it'd be an interesting thing to explore.
Yeah.
Hey, Ken, is Robert Rick still on your staff?
He is, and we've been a lot of reminiscing at the office of the staff members that lost loved ones, and the effort afterwards to keep. We talk about cooking. You talked about cooking. Let me tell you, one morning we cooked 40 pounds of bacon at the office because there was you like that bacon,
Yeah.
but the reason was because we had about 40 people in the office that needed to be fed, clothed. They were all at the office. The staff members, look, the people keeping everyone safe became the victims too. So they had to be fed. We slept in the parking lot in an RV for a month, and we never complained because we were lucky to have a roof over our heads. So there's all sorts of stories that we have from that event and trying to tarp people's houses. And let me tell you, one day, a story that I don't tell too often. One day we were outside after Katrina at the office in Slidell, and about 7 ambulances show up, and they're out of diesel, and they're bringing victims out to try to get to a hospital. And we asked them where they were headed. They said, it looks like the closest place we can go is Shreveport, and we're out of fuel. So it was an interesting story, and I still have pictures of the ambulances and all of us outside. We did everything from siphon diesel out from other vehicles. We created a funnel. The National Guard helped us. We filled up all those ambulances, and it's interesting. To this day, I never know the fate, but they left on their way to Shreveport. But just stories of just the office after Katrina are just staggering.
Well, that statement that he wrote on Sunday morning was just legendary, Ken. And how's that viewed today in the office and in the Weather Service?
It's the ominous. The statement was ominous. It was, and the reality was that was a descriptor, right? And we were talking about different words to use, different pictures to use to convey the threat. That conveyed it. I mean, look, people saw that, the media saw that, and you could read it now and still get goosebumps. And really the reality is, we have a system where you can select the different words, and that was the words that he selected and wordsmithed them to what he wanted to portray. But that was descriptive. And even today, you look back, it was a foreshadowing of the disaster to come.
Yeah, Ken, I wanted to show this picture, share this image here. We've talked about, well, if you put your home up on pilings, then you're going to be okay. Well, look at this image. These pilings are 2 feet high. There's nothing on top of it.
Exactly.
And I couldn't even find this home. I drove back through this area. I couldn't even find where this home ended up.
Yeah, you know, these are the ones that will get you through some hurricanes, you know, but when you start getting, you know, you start getting a storm surge of 5-6 feet, and then the interpretation by the homeowner is 5-6 feet. Great, I'm 10 foot up. Well, guess what? The waves are going to add another 5, 6, 7 feet on top of it. So the wave action is going to take out the house despite the storm surge forecast. So, you know, it's a rough road. And you look at the trend in Mississippi trying to develop along I-10. That's probably a good trend, right? I mean, look, we're a little further. The coast is nice. We still got some neat things that we could do there. But look, we still have all over the place. And you know, you look outside my window, I'm at 14 feet, and I'm happy to have every single inch of that 14 feet outside. And you know, it does. Even in a big thunderstorm, the street fills up with water. So the vulnerability it's all around us. It really is. It's a tough thing, and we live with that risk. And we were talking about, you know, the insurance. I mean, John, you were bringing it up, and we were kind of chatting back and forth about it. Look, you can raise the insurance till it's sky high. People will either just leave or they just won't pay it, and then the next disaster they'll just be without a house. They'll, you know, everyone will, you know, really feel sorry, and the big political aspect of that will rebuild again, or they'll leave. So tough solutions, and none of them have immediate impacts. All of them are going to be long term.
Hey, for those watching, I had the Robert Rick statement up while Ken was talking. The paragraph that always got me from that: airborne debris will be widespread and may include heavy items such as household appliances, even light vehicles. Sport utility vehicles and light trucks will be moved. Persons, pets, and livestock exposed to the winds will face certain death. This stuff is heavy. I mean, I remember reading that. It was like, I think, Sunday morning when that came down, and goodness,
right.
Everybody just stopped, and it took our breath away. But Bill, we got 2 minutes. You want to share a Nash Roberts story?
Yeah, one quick thing I wanted to say to Keith. You remember, Keith, with Hurricane Frederick, the preliminary statement afterwards, the Weather Service, you know, this legend on the Gulf Coast was viewed to be a problem by the Weather Service. It actually said in the preliminary report, it said the Nash Roberts problem surfaced again, you know, because Nash was saying, you know, hey, the storm is not coming to New Orleans when the hurricane warning for Frederick still included the city. So he was viewed in the Weather Service to be a problem, but he was a legend on the Gulf Coast for sure.
Yeah, I remember reading that. Yeah, sure do.
And
all right, guys. Yeah, go ahead.
No, just still a legend today, because I still go to senior centers and other places, and I get the Nash stories, so he's still a legend.
Yeah, no, he was. All right, guys, I got to go do some television, and again, this is special. We're just doing Katrina. We're not going to do all the recorded segments and the email and the picks of the week. We'll pick that up next Monday night. But thanks to all of our guests, Dr. Blackwell and Ken. Thank you all so much for being on the show tonight. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, James.
And we are typically here Monday nights at 9:30 Eastern, 8:30 Central Time. You can watch live at live.bigbrainsmedia.com. We know most of you listen to the audio podcast. If you've got some reaction to the show tonight, you want to send us an email. The email address is email@weatherbrains.com. All of our social media accounts are there as well. And let me stop this music real quick, Keith. If somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Email. My email address is kblackwell@southalabama.edu.
See, we get all these creepers to send you guys some emails. Ken, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
It's jamesspan@noaa.gov.
That is the line of the night, ladies.
And Ken Graham, I still have to tell you, thank you every time I think of you for National Weather Service chat. That NWS chat is super.
Oh yeah,
it works great. But in all seriousness, Kenneth, KENNETH.Graham, GRAHAM @noaa.gov. I'm welcome to you.
There you go. Hey, thanks, guys. On behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks a lot for listening. Have a great week, and God bless. Hey, thanks,
great
guys.
Show, guys. Thanks.
Show. This was great. I loved
Thanks,
it.
Ken. Thanks,
yeah,
guys.
absolutely. It was great.
Thanks, guys.